Welcome. This video is part of a series about clinical trials at UCSF. The topic of this video is, what is a qualifying clinical trial and how does it affect my study budget and billing? The first step in the coverage analysis process is determining if the study is a qualifying clinical trial, or QCT. Understanding the QCT determination is important because it helps study teams know which items and services are billable, which means they are eligible for coverage by the Medicare program. Medicare covers the routine costs of a qualifying clinical trial, as well as reasonable and necessary items and services used to diagnose and treat complications arising from participating in all clinical trials. If a trial does not qualify, then the costs for all items and services related to the clinical trial are not billable to Medicare or insurance providers and must be provided by the study sponsor. This is important as it directly affects your study budget. In this video, we will identify the components of a qualifying clinical trial, let you know what documents you need to send to the Office of Clinical Research so that they can determine if your trial qualifies. Determine what that means for you, the study team. Identify what is billable if your trial qualifies. Identify what happens if the trial doesn't qualify. Provide you resources in case you have questions about qualifying trials. What is a qualifying clinical trial? The term qualifying clinical trial is a Medicare term based on the National Coverage Determination, NCD, for routine costs in clinical trials, Section 310.1, also known as the Clinical Trial Policy, CTP. In order for a trial to be considered a qualifying clinical trial, it must satisfy two criteria. 1. It must meet all three necessary requirements. 2. It must be deemed to meet the 7 highly desirable characteristics. Let's talk about these two items separately. First, any clinical trial receiving Medicare coverage of routine costs must meet the following 3 requirements. First, it must meet the benefit category requirement. The investigational team or service falls within a Medicare benefit category. This means that the investigational team or service must be something that Medicare pays for generally, as an item or service. For example, Medicare pays for CT scans under certain circumstances, so a CT scan falls within a Medicare benefit category. An example of something that would not fall within a Medicare benefit category is cosmetic surgery. Because Medicare does not pay for cosmetic surgery, a study investigating the effects of cosmetic surgery would not be a qualifying clinical trial. Second, it must meet the therapeutic benefit requirement. A trial must not be designed exclusively to test toxicity or disease pathophysiology. The trial must have therapeutic intent. The trial must be designed to intervene in a patient's condition to help the patient. Third, it must meet the diagnosed patient's requirement. The study must enroll patients with diagnosed diseases. While the clinical trial policy does allow providers to enroll healthy patients as a proper control group in a study of diagnostic interventions, such studies must enroll patients with specific diagnosed diseases. Once the first 3 requirements are met, then a determination must be made if the trial has the additional 7 desirable characteristics. 1. The principal purpose of the trial is to test whether the intervention potentially improves the participants' health outcomes. 2. The trial is well supported by available scientific and medical information, or it is intended to clarify or establish the health outcomes of interventions already in common clinical use. 3. The trial does not unjustifiably duplicate existing studies. 4. The trial design is appropriate to answer the research question being asked in the trial. 5. The trial is sponsored by a credible organization or individual capable of executing the proposed trial successfully. 6. The trial is in compliance with federal regulations relating to the protection of human subjects. 7. All aspects of the trial are conducted according to the appropriate standards of scientific integrity. If the first 3 requirements are met, and the trial is deemed to have the 7 highly desirable characteristics, then the trial is considered to be a qualifying clinical trial. The following types of studies are listed in the clinical trial policy as deemed to have the 7 desirable characteristics. Trials funded by NIH, CDC, AHRQ, CMS, DoD, and VA. Or trials supported by centers or cooperative groups that are funded by the NIH, CDC, AHRQ, CMS, DoD, and VA. Or trials conducted under an investigational new drug application, IND, reviewed by the FDA. And/or drug trials that are exempt from having an IND under 21 CRF 312.2b1 will be deemed automatically qualified until the qualifying criteria are developed and the certification process is in place. Once a trial has been determined to be a QCT, the routine costs associated with it are billable to and reimbursable by Medicare. What does this mean for you? Billing processes which reduce errors help UCSF mitigate risk. To help ensure that you are on the right track to determining if a study is a qualifying clinical trial, there are a few documents that are necessary for the Office of Clinical Research, OCR, to make the qualifying determination. They are: 1. The study protocol. 2. The informed consent form. A draft is fine. 3. A completed intake survey. 4. The budget and clinical trial agreement, CTA, contract. So what can be billed if your trial qualifies? Now that you understand what a qualifying trial is and what it means for you, you will next learn what is billable for the study. Medicare will cover the routine costs during the clinical trial that would otherwise be covered by Medicare outside the clinical trial setting. But what are routine costs? These include conventional care, the same type of care that is provided outside of clinical trials as is provided during clinical trials for similar type therapy. Sometimes people refer to this as standard of care, SOC, or routine costs. But the service will only be covered and billable to Medicare if Medicare would otherwise pay for the service. Administration of the investigational item or service and the appropriate monitoring of the effects of the item or service and the prevention of complications. Diagnosis or treatment of known complications of the investigational item or service that is reasonable and necessary. Why do you need a billing grid for a qualifying clinical trial? All clinical trials at UCSF are required to have a billing grid regardless of whether the study is a qualifying clinical trial or not. The billing grid facilitates billing compliance and enables coordinators and research administration to correctly identify those items and services that are for research purposes only from those that are part of routine care and therefore billable to Medicare or the patient's provider. What if your trial doesn't qualify? If any one of the 3 necessary requirements is not met, or it is not deemed to have met the 7 desirable characteristics, then the study is not a qualifying clinical trial. Per UCSF policy, only the care that would have been provided outside of the clinical trial can be billed, and none of the study procedures can be billed to Medicare. This means that you cannot bill insurance for the administration or any complications arising from the investigational item or service. If you have any questions regarding what is classified as a qualifying clinical trial or billing, please contact the OCR intake group at clinicaltrials@ucsf.edu.